My brother forged my signature on a 10-year binding military contract to sabotage my entire future. My parents cheered for him and called me a traitor when I fought back. My name is Desmond. I am 22 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life never really felt like it belonged to me. If you grew up in a family where one sibling is treated like a literal god walking among mortals, you probably know exactly what I am talking about. In my house, that god was my older brother, Donovan. He is 28, works some high-paying corporate job, and has an ego the size of Texas. My parents, Vincent and Sylvia, worship the ground he walks on. To them, Donovan is the golden child, the standard of perfection, the man who can do no wrong. And me? I was just the quiet younger brother, the one who was supposed to sit in the corner, follow orders, and never, ever outshine the favorite. I am an engineering student. I love building things, understanding how systems work, fixing what is broken. It requires patience and logic, two things my family severely lacks. Donovan is the exact opposite. He does not build, he controls. He manipulates. And my parents let him. They did not just let him, they actively encouraged him to act like a second father to me, a dictator who had the final say on my haircut, my clothes, my friends, and eventually my future. I realized how messed up this dynamic was when I was 12 years old. I had spent 3 months working on a complex science fair project. It was a mechanical bridge model, built from scratch with hundreds of wooden sticks, precise gluing, and tiny motor wires. I was so proud of it. I left it on the dining table to dry overnight. The next morning, Donovan walked into the kitchen, annoyed that my project was taking up space where he wanted to read his magazine. He did not ask me to move it. He just swept his arm across the table and shoved the entire bridge onto the hardwood floor. It shattered into dozens of pieces. 3 months of work, gone in 2 seconds. When I screamed and started crying, my parents ran into the room. But they did not yell at Donovan. My mother, Sylvia, looked at the broken pieces, sighed, and told me I should have known better than to leave my toys in my brother's way. My father, Vincent, told me to stop whining and clean up the mess before I ruined Donovan's morning. I was forced to apologize to the guy who just destroyed my hard work. That was the day I learned a very hard lesson. My anger did not matter. My feelings did not matter. Only Donovan mattered. Since then, I learned to keep my head down. I buried myself in my textbooks, focused entirely on getting my engineering degree, and counted the days until I could afford to move out and never look back. I just needed to survive my final year of college. I thought I was almost at the finish line. I thought I had successfully navigated the minefield of my toxic family. But I underestimated just how far a control freak will go when he senses his victim is about to escape. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished a grueling 3-hour thermodynamics exam, and my brain felt like mush. I took the bus home, grabbed the mail from the mailbox by the front door, and shuffled inside. I was flipping through the usual junk mail, grocery flyers, and bills when a thick, crisp white envelope caught my eye. It had an official government seal on it. Specifically, the Federal Recruitment Office. It was addressed to me. I frowned, staring at my printed name. I had never requested information from the military. I had no interest in joining. I had an internship lined up at an engineering firm. I tore the top of the envelope off and pulled out a stack of heavy paper. My eyes scanned the first page, and the words hit me like a physical punch to the chest. Congratulations on your preliminary enlistment. 10-year binding military contract. Active duty training commencement. It listed a start date that was exactly 6 weeks away. My vision actually blurred for a second. My ears started ringing. A 10-year binding contract? My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. I could barely breathe. I flipped to the second page, then the third, desperately looking for the part that said this was a joke, a mistake, a clerical error. But there, at the bottom of the last page, was a signature. My name, written in blue ink. But it was not my handwriting. It was a sloppy, forced imitation of my signature. I gripped the papers so tight my knuckles turned white. I walked into the living room, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. Donovan was sitting on the sofa, sipping a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. My parents were sitting at the dining table, drinking tea. I held up the letter, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden, blinding rage. I asked out loud what the hell this was. I asked how a federal military contract with my forged signature ended up in our mailbox. Donovan slowly lowered his phone. He took a sip of his coffee, looked me dead in the eye, and smirked. It was that same arrogant, untouchable smirk he had when he broke my bridge 10 years ago. He calmly stated that he filled it out for me. He said I was spending too much time playing with engineering toys and avoiding the real world. He said I lacked discipline, I lacked respect, and a 10-year stint in the military would finally make a real man out of me. He said he did me a favor. I stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of what I was hearing. He had committed federal fraud. He had signed away a decade of my life, my freedom, my career, all because he felt like it. I turned to my parents, expecting them to finally, for once in their lives, see that their golden child had crossed a massive legal and moral line. But Vincent and Sylvia did not look shocked. They did not look angry at him. My father nodded slowly, crossing his arms, and said Donovan had a point. My mother smiled softly and said it was a wonderful opportunity and that I should be thanking my brother for taking such a proactive interest in my future. They were in on it. They knew. They let him forge my signature to trap me. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. I was standing in a room with 3 people who shared my blood, and I realized I was entirely, completely alone. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my small desk in the dark, staring at the recruitment papers illuminated by the harsh glow of my desk lamp. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Donovan's smug face and my parents' approving nods. By the time the sun came up, the initial shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. I am an engineer. When a system is critically failing, you do not panic. You assess the damage, you isolate the variables, and you fix it. My life was the failing system, and I had to fix it right now. At 8 in the morning, I called the phone number listed at the top of the federal letter. What followed was a bureaucratic nightmare that drained a year off my life. I spent over 4 hours trapped in an endless loop of automated messages. Press 1 for enlistment, press 2 for records, press 3 to wait on hold while awful elevator music plays on a loop. When a human finally picked up, I explained the situation. I told them I did not sign the paper, that my brother forged my name without my consent, and that I was a full-time college student. The recruitment officer on the other end of the line was completely unsympathetic. His voice was flat-bored, the voice of a man who dealt with hundreds of people trying to back out of commitments every single day. He told me that a signature is a signature. He pulled up my file and stated that the preliminary paperwork was already processed through the federal system. He said that unless I could provide undeniable, legal proof of criminal forgery, the contract was legally binding. If I simply did not show up on the reporting date, I could face serious penalties. I begged him to just look at the signature, to compare it to my driver's license on file, but he cut me off. He said the military does not play games with family disputes. Prove it in court or pack a bag in 6 weeks. Click. The line went dead. I dropped my phone on the desk and dragged my hands down my face. I felt like I was suffocating. Just as I was trying to process the fact that the military would not help me, my laptop chimed. It was an urgent email notification from my university's financial aid office. I clicked it open, and my stomach plummeted all over again. The email stated that my federal student loans and grants for the upcoming semester had been flagged and suspended. Because the federal database now showed me as having an active, upcoming military enlistment, I was no longer eligible for standard civilian student aid. The system had automatically frozen my account. If I did not clear this up immediately, my tuition would not be paid. I would be dropped from my engineering classes. The degree I had worked my entire life for, the one thing that was going to be my ticket out of this miserable house, was slipping through my fingers. Donovan had not just signed me up for the military, he had actively detonated a bomb in the middle of my civilian life. The trap was closing and the timer was ticking fast. I needed evidence, and I needed it fast. I knew Donovan was arrogant, which usually meant he was sloppy. Later that afternoon, while Donovan was at his corporate job and my parents were out grocery shopping, I slipped out of my room and walked down the hall to Donovan's bedroom. My heart was in my throat. If they came home and caught me, it would be a disaster. I pushed his door open. His room was perfectly neat, exactly what you would expect from a control freak. I went straight to the small trash bin under his expensive glass desk. I carefully dug through crumpled papers and empty energy drink cans. Near the bottom, I found exactly what I was hoping for. 3 crumpled sheets of loose-leaf paper. I flattened them out on the desk. It was a page full of practice signatures. He had written my name over and over again, trying to get the loop of the D and the slant of the D at the end just right. It was sickening to look at, but it was also a goldmine. I pulled out my phone, snapped high-resolution photos of every single page, and then put the crumpled papers exactly back where I found them. I left the house and took 2 buses across town to a dingy diner to meet my best friend, Felix. Felix and I had been friends since middle school. He was the only person who knew exactly how insane my family was. I ordered a black coffee, slid the military contract across the sticky table, and showed him the photos on my phone. Felix looked at the documents, his jaw dropping. He looked up at me and said he remembered something. 2 weeks ago, Felix had come over to my house to drop off a textbook. While he was waiting in the hallway, he heard Donovan loudly bragging on the phone to someone about how he was filling out federal forms to finally whip his little brother into shape. Felix said he thought Donovan was just talking trash, but now it all made sense. I asked Felix if he would be willing to put that in a sworn statement. Without hesitation, Felix said yes. Next, I stepped outside the diner and called my Uncle Edgar. Edgar is my father's brother, but he is the black sheep of the family because he actually has common sense. I asked him about the family dinner from last month. Edgar sighed heavily into the phone. He admitted that after I left the table that night, he heard Vincent and Sylvia explicitly telling Donovan to look into military options for me because they felt I was becoming too independent. Edgar said he was disgusted by it, and he agreed to write a formal affidavit confirming what he heard. I had my witnesses. I had my photos. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet. I walked into the living room. Vincent was watching television. I did not yell. I did not scream. I just calmly stated that I had spoken to the university, and my financial aid was suspended because of the forged contract. I asked him, one last time, to make Donovan withdraw the application and confess. Vincent stood up, pointing a finger at my chest. He told me to stop embarrassing the family. He said if I dared to make a scene or challenge my brother, I could pack my bags and get out of his house. He thought it was a threat that would make me submit. But I had already packed my bags hours ago. I looked at him, turned around, walked to my room, grabbed my 2 heavy suitcases, and walked right out the front door into the cold night air. I did not look back. I took a cab to Felix's apartment, and for the next 3 weeks, that cramped, lumpy sofa became my bed. Thank you for watching so far. If you are enjoying the story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below telling me the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video reach more people, and I really appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to the story. Sleeping on a lumpy sofa in a tiny apartment was physically uncomfortable, but for the first time in 22 years, I woke up without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I was out of that toxic house. But the reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had less than 5 weeks to overturn a federal military contract, get my university funding restored, and keep my life from completely falling apart. The next morning, I took some of the money I had saved from my summer jobs and booked a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in civil and criminal fraud. Sitting in his office, surrounded by heavy leather chairs and walls lined with thick law books, made everything feel intensely real. I laid out the military contract, the photos of Donovan's practice signatures, and the written statements from Felix and Uncle Edgar. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s, reviewed the documents in silence. When he finally looked up, he did not sugarcoat it. He told me that what my brother did was not a prank, it was federal fraud. It carried severe criminal penalties. He said the military board would not care about family drama, they only cared about hard, undeniable proof. His first instruction was clear. I needed to hire a forensic handwriting expert immediately to analyze the forged signature against my actual handwriting. It was going to cost a lot of money, but it was the only way to build an ironclad defense. He also told me to document every single text, call, and interaction with my family from that moment forward. My life became a grueling, exhausting routine. I would wake up at 5 in the morning on Felix's sofa, my back aching. I would take a 40-minute bus ride to the university, sitting in advanced engineering lectures, trying to focus on calculus and fluid dynamics, while the threat of losing everything hovered over my head. After classes, I would rush to my part-time engineering internship. My boss, Gregory, was a strict but fair man who expected perfection. I was barely holding it together, running on cheap coffee and 4 hours of sleep. Every dollar I earned at the internship went straight into a savings account to pay the lawyer and the handwriting expert. I was stretched so thin I felt like I was going to snap, but the anger kept me going. Every time I felt like giving up, I pictured Donovan's smug smirk in the living room, and the exhaustion vanished, replaced by pure, burning determination. I was not going to let him win. I was going to build a legal machine that would crush his arrogance once and for all. After 3 weeks of living out of a suitcase at Felix's place, I finally found a tiny, cheap apartment on the edge of the city that I could barely afford. The paint was peeling, the linoleum floors were stained, and the plumbing made weird noises, but it was mine. No one had a key except me. Because of my engineering background, I did not just move in, I fortified the place. I spent my first weekend buying equipment online. I installed a heavy-duty deadbolt on the front door. I set up hidden, high-definition security cameras outside my door and facing my designated parking spot. I wired them directly to a secure server and wrote a custom script to send instant alerts to my phone if motion was detected. My lawyer told me to protect myself, and I took it very seriously. I knew Donovan. When he realized I was not rolling over, he was going to escalate. And I was right. The smear campaign started a few days later. Since I was not at home to be bullied, Donovan decided to weaponize the extended family. My phone started blowing up with text messages. Cousins, aunts, and uncles, people I had not spoken to in months, were suddenly very invested in my life. Donovan had spun a masterful lie. He told everyone that I had happily agreed to enlist to get my life on track, but then chickened out at the last minute. He painted himself as the supportive older brother trying to keep me from ruining my future, and he painted me as a lazy, ungrateful coward who was making up lies about forgery to dodge my duty. The messages were brutal. One aunt texted me saying I was a disgrace to the family name. A cousin left a voicemail calling me a draft dodger and saying I should be ashamed for breaking my parents' hearts. Vincent and Sylvia were, of course, playing the victims, telling everyone how stressed they were over my rebellious phase. Sitting in my quiet, dark apartment, reading those messages, the betrayal stung. These were people I had grown up with, people who had known me my whole life, and they believed Donovan's lies without even asking for my side of the story. It hurt, but it also made things incredibly clear. They were not my family. They were just Donovan's audience. I took a deep breath, opened my phone settings, and started blocking numbers. One by one. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my father, my mother, and finally, Donovan. I cut the digital cord completely. The silence in the apartment after that was deafening, but it was peaceful. The battle lines were drawn. They had their lies, but I was building a fortress of truth, and the handwriting expert had just sent an email saying the final report was ready. The real war was about to begin. The email from the forensic handwriting expert arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen, a half-empty mug of cheap coffee in my hand. When I saw the attachment, My heart did a strange flutter. I clicked download and opened the file. It was a 50-page document, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever read in my entire life. The expert had not just looked at the signatures, they had completely dismantled Donovan's forgery on a microscopic level. The report detailed the exact pressure points of the pen, noting that the forged signature had unnatural hesitations, as if the writer was slowly drawing the letters rather than signing them naturally. It pointed out the incorrect slant of the letter D and the completely wrong spacing between the vowels. The conclusion, printed in bold at the bottom of the summary page, was absolute. There was a 0% chance that the signature on the military contract belonged to me. It was unequivocally classified as a fraudulent document. I printed 3 copies of the 50-page report immediately. I put one in a waterproof folder, handed one to my lawyer, and mailed the third directly to the Military Recruitment Board via certified overnight mail, demanding a formal preliminary hearing. Because the evidence was submitted by a licensed forensic expert, the military board had no choice but to take it seriously. They scheduled a hearing for the following Wednesday. My lawyer told me that Donovan would be summoned as well, since his name was listed as the emergency contact and submitting party on the digital application portal. When Wednesday arrived, I put on my only suit. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but it made me feel like I had armor on. I walked into the federal building with my lawyer beside me. The hearing room was intimidating. It had sterile white walls, a long mahogany table, and 3 military officers sitting at the head of it, looking like they would rather be anywhere else. Then, the door opened and Donovan walked in. He was wearing an expensive tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. Vincent and Sylvia were right behind him, looking like they were attending an awards ceremony for their golden child. When Donovan saw me sitting there with a lawyer, his arrogant smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. He sat across from me, leaning back in his chair, radiating that familiar, suffocating confidence. The lead officer called the room to order. He stated that they were there to review the validity of the enlistment contract. He turned to Donovan and asked him directly if he had any knowledge of the signature being forged. Donovan let out a condescending little laugh. He looked at the officers and said, in his smoothest corporate voice, that I was just a nervous college kid getting cold feet. He claimed he merely helped me fill out the online portion, but that I had signed the physical paper myself. He even looked at me with fake pity, telling the board that I had a history of making bad decisions and lying to get out of responsibilities. Vincent and Sylvia nodded vigorously in the background. That was when my lawyer stood up. He did not yell. He did not act dramatic. He simply slid a copy of the 50-page forensic report across the mahogany table to the lead officer. He stated that a licensed, court-recognized forensic expert had analyzed the document and concluded beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was a forgery. The room went dead silent. The lead officer put on his reading glasses and flipped through the summary. You could hear a pin drop. Donovan's posture suddenly changed. He sat up straight. The smirk completely vanished from his face, replaced by a tight, pale expression. The officer looked up from the report, his eyes narrowing as he glared at my brother. He asked Donovan if he wanted to revise his statement before the board forwarded this matter to federal investigators. Donovan panicked. The smooth corporate talker completely crumbled. He started stammering, his voice rising in pitch. He tried to backtrack, saying maybe I signed it when I was tired, or maybe the expert was paid off. He interrupted the officers, waving his hands defensively. It was a pathetic display. The military officers exchanged a single, knowing look. They had zero tolerance for liars in their ranks, and even less for someone who disrespected a formal proceeding. The lead officer slammed his folder shut. He announced that effective immediately, my enlistment was officially paused pending a full criminal investigation. The contract was frozen. My financial aid flag would be lifted within 24 hours. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for months. I saved my tuition. But looking at Donovan's face, dark red with fury and humiliation, I knew this was far from over. The board hearing had completely shattered Donovan's illusion of control. For 28 years, He had operated under the assumption that he could do whatever he wanted, and our parents would shield him from the consequences. Being publicly humiliated and threatened with federal investigation by military officers broke something inside him. And when a control freak loses control, they do not self-reflect. They lash out. It was 2 in the morning on a Friday. I was dead asleep in my tiny apartment, exhausted from catching up on the engineering assignments I had neglected during the hearing prep. Suddenly, my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. It was the custom alarm script I had written for my security cameras. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed. The camera pointed at the street showed a dark SUV pulling up to the curb. I instantly recognized the car. It was Donovan. He stepped out of the vehicle into the freezing night air. He was not wearing his expensive suits anymore. He had on a dark hoodie, and his body language was erratic, jerky. He was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk in front of my building, looking up at my dark windows. He started shouting. Even through the microphone of the camera, I could hear the pure, unhinged rage in his voice. He called me a coward. He screamed that I was ruining his life, that I was a traitor to the family, and that I was going to pay for humiliating him. I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed, watching the screen. I did not turn on a single light. I did not move toward the window. My thumb hovered over the emergency call button, but I waited. I knew him. Shouting was not going to be enough for his ego. On the screen, Donovan walked over to my car, a beat-up sedan parked under the street lamp. He pulled something long and metallic from his jacket. It looked like a heavy metal pipe or a tire iron. He raised it above his head and brought it down with terrifying force right onto the center of my windshield. Even inside the apartment, I heard the sickening crunch of shattering glass. The spiderweb cracks exploded across the windshield in the glaring yellow light of the street lamp. He hit it again. And again. Then he walked around the side of the car, dragging the metal pipe deeply along the paint, leaving a jagged, silver scar across both doors. He smashed the driver's side mirror, kicking the pieces into the gutter. He stood there for a moment, chest heaving, staring up at my window, expecting me to come running out. Expecting a confrontation. But I gave him nothing. I sat in complete silence, watching the little red recording dot blink on my phone screen. Every swing, every scratch, his face perfectly illuminated by the street lamp, recorded in crisp, high-definition video. Eventually, realizing I was not going to give him the satisfaction of a fight, he spat on the hood of my ruined car, got back into his SUV, and sped off into the night. I sat there in the dark for a long time. My car was totaled. It was my only way to get to my internship. The financial damage was going to be massive. But a strange, cold smile spread across my face. I opened the video file, hit save, and backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. Donovan thought he was punishing me. He thought he was showing me who was boss. He had no idea that he had just handed me the final, undeniable piece of evidence I needed to lock him away. I did not go back to sleep. I took a shower, made a fresh pot of coffee, and waited for the sun to come up. As soon as the clock hit 7 in the morning, I put on my jacket, grabbed my phone, and walked out to my ruined car. There was glass everywhere. I took dozens of pictures from every angle, documenting the damage for insurance and for the police. Then I called a tow truck and I called my lawyer. We were no longer just fighting a fraudulent piece of paper. We were pressing criminal charges. By noon that same day, I was sitting in a police precinct, handing a flash drive with the high-definition security footage over to a detective. When he watched the video of Donovan smashing my windshield with a metal pipe, he did not even hesitate. He took my statement, documented the estimated thousands of dollars in property damage, and immediately helped me file for an emergency restraining order. A judge signed off on it before the end of the day. The order explicitly banned Donovan from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. I thought the restraining order would finally create a wall of silence. I was wrong. Donovan could not get to me, so my parents decided to do his dirty work. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my engineering internship, sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a CAD rendering. Suddenly, I heard a commotion near the front reception area. I stood up and looked over the cubicle wall. Vincent and Sylvia had bypassed security and were standing in the middle of the office floor, demanding to see me. My stomach dropped. My coworkers were staring. Sylvia spotted me and started marching over, her face red with anger. She started yelling right there in the open office, telling me I was a monster for pressing charges against my own flesh and blood. Vincent pointed his finger at me, shouting that I needed to call the police and drop the vandalism case immediately, or I would be dead to them. Before I could even react, my boss, Gregory, stepped out of his corner office. Gregory is a towering man with a voice that commands immediate respect. He walked straight up to my parents, placing himself between them and my desk. He did not raise his voice, but his tone was like ice. He told them they were trespassing on private property. He said if they did not turn around and walk out the door in exactly 10 seconds, he would have building security drag them out and press corporate trespassing charges against both of them. Vincent tried to argue, puffing out his chest, but Gregory just pulled out his phone and started dialing security. My parents backed down. They shot me one last look of absolute disgust and stormed out of the office. I was mortified. I started apologizing profusely to Gregory, terrified that I was going to lose my internship because of this family drama. But Gregory just put a hand on my shoulder. He told me to sit down and breathe. He said he had seen toxic families before, and he knew none of this was my fault. He assured me my job was 100% safe, and he told the front desk to permanently ban my parents from the building. The embarrassment of that day was heavy, but Donovan was about to experience something much, much worse. Donovan had always prided himself on his corporate image. He worked as a senior financial analyst in a high-end glass building downtown. His entire identity was built on looking successful, untouchable, and superior. 2 days after my parents ambushed my office, Donovan decided he was above the law. He drove his SUV slowly past my office building during my lunch hour, glaring at me through the window while I was grabbing coffee across the street. He was testing the boundaries of the restraining order, trying to intimidate me. I did not hesitate. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of his license plate from across the street, and called the police. I told them my brother was violating a court-ordered restraining order right at this exact moment. Because of the active vandalism case, the police moved fast. But they did not catch him at my office. They tracked him down an hour later, right at his prestigious corporate job. Felix's cousin actually worked in the same building and texted Felix the details later that afternoon. 2 uniformed police officers walked straight into the financial firm's sleek, quiet lobby. They bypassed the receptionist, walked onto the busy trading floor, and loudly called out Donovan's name. In front of his boss, his subordinates, and dozens of his colleagues, the officers informed Donovan that he was under arrest for violating a restraining order and malicious destruction of property. They made him put his hands behind his back. They clicked the handcuffs around his wrists. And they marched the golden child out of the building, completely destroying his untouchable corporate facade in less than 5 minutes. The fallout was going to be spectacular. The criminal trial took place 4 months later. The waiting period had been exhausting, filled with endless legal meetings and deposition transcripts, but finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The courtroom was vast, intimidating, lined with heavy oak paneling and smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my lawyer. Across the aisle, sitting at the defense table, was Donovan. He looked terrible. The confident, arrogant older brother who had terrorized me my entire life looked completely deflated. His expensive suit hung a little loosely on him, and the dark circles under his eyes showed that the stress of the impending criminal convictions was eating him alive. Vincent and Sylvia sat directly behind him in the gallery. They did not look at me once. The prosecutor was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who wasted no time. She stood before the judge and systematically dismantled every lie Donovan had ever told. She started with the federal fraud. She brought out the 50-page handwriting analysis, walking the judge through the blatant discrepancies in the signature on the military contract. She called Felix to the stand. Felix, looking incredibly nervous but standing firm, recounted the exact words he heard Donovan use when bragging about forging the documents to whip me into shape. Uncle Edgar testified via a sworn video deposition, confirming that our parents had actively encouraged the manipulation. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The prosecutor dimmed the courtroom lights and played the high-definition security footage from my apartment. The entire courtroom watched in absolute silence as the giant monitor displayed Donovan, face twisted in rage, smashing my windshield with a metal pipe and keying the doors. The sound of the shattering glass echoed off the high ceiling of the courtroom. It was undeniable, brutal, and completely unhinged. I glanced back at my parents. For the first time, the blind devotion on their faces cracked. They looked at the screen, watching their golden child act like a violent criminal, and they looked physically sick. But Donovan just stared at the floor, refusing to look up. When it was the defense's turn, Donovan's lawyer had nothing to work with. He tried to argue that it was a family dispute that got out of hand, that Donovan was under immense work stress, and that he had no prior criminal record. He basically begged the judge for leniency. The judge, an older man with a stern face, looked over his glasses at Donovan. He did not look sympathetic. He stated that forging a federal document to bind another human being to a 10-year military contract was not a family dispute, it was a malicious attempt to steal someone's freedom. He added that the subsequent property damage and violation of the restraining order showed a complete disregard for the law. The judge delivered the verdict without hesitation. Guilty on all charges: fraud, malicious destruction of property, and contempt of court. The sentencing was heavy. Because it was his first offense, he avoided actual prison time, but just barely. He was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation. He was ordered to complete 500 hours of community service, picking up trash on the highways. He was hit with massive state fines. And most importantly, he walked out of that courtroom as a convicted felon. That permanent stain on his record meant his life as a high-flying corporate analyst was over forever. When the gavel banged, officially ending the trial, a massive weight lifted off my chest. I could finally breathe. I stood up, shook my lawyer's hand, and walked out into the hallway. Vincent and Sylvia were waiting there. I thought maybe, just maybe, seeing the undeniable proof of his crimes would wake them up. But I was wrong. Sylvia's eyes were red from crying, but when she looked at me, there was nothing but pure hatred. Vincent stepped right up into my face. He pointed a shaking finger at me and told me that I had destroyed the family. He said I had ruined my brother's life over a piece of paper and a broken car window. He told me that from this day forward, I was dead to them. They had no second son. I looked at the man who had enabled my torment for 22 years. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You chose a criminal over your own son. You have to live with that." I don't. I turned my back on them and walked out the glass doors of the courthouse, stepping into the bright afternoon sun, finally, completely free. The criminal trial was about justice, but the civil lawsuit that followed a month later was about consequences. My lawyer did not hold back. We sued Donovan for the cost of my totaled car, the exorbitant legal fees I had racked up defending myself, and the emotional distress he had intentionally inflicted. Because Donovan now had a criminal conviction for fraud and property damage, his high-paying corporate job fired him the very next morning. Financial firms do not employ convicted fraudsters. His reputation in the industry was completely obliterated. But getting fired did not save him from the civil judgment. The judge ruled entirely in my favor. Since Donovan no longer had the cash to pay the settlement outright, the court ordered a massive garnishment on his future wages. For the next 10 years, a significant percentage of any paycheck he earned at whatever minimum wage job he could find would be automatically deducted and sent directly to my bank account. It was a brutal, inescapable financial anchor tied around his neck. To keep Donovan from going bankrupt and losing his luxury condo, Vincent and Sylvia stepped in. They drained their entire retirement savings to pay off his immediate fines and legal debts. The comfortable retirement they had planned for decades vanished in a matter of weeks, all to protect the golden child who had thrown it all away out of pure arrogance. The fallout within the extended family was absolute. The court records were public. Everyone saw the handwriting analysis, the police reports, and the vandalism video. The aunts and cousins who had sent me hateful messages suddenly realized how horribly they had been manipulated. A few tried to reach out to apologize, sending me long texts about how sorry they were. I did not reply to a single one. I left them on read. They showed me who they truly were when things got hard, and I had no space in my new life for fair-weather family members. Our family was permanently fractured, and Donovan and my parents were completely isolated. With the military contract officially shredded and my financial aid fully restored, I threw myself back into my studies with a focus I never knew I had. The anxiety that used to sit in my chest was gone. I spent my weekends at my quiet, secure apartment, building circuit boards and writing code, completely undisturbed. When graduation day arrived, I did not have a family cheering section in the audience. I did not need one. Felix was there, screaming my name from the back row as I walked across the stage to accept my engineering degree. I graduated with high honors. The very next Monday, Gregory called me into his office. He had watched me handle the hardest, most stressful year of my life without letting my work performance slip. He handed me a contract for a full-time, junior engineer position with a salary that was more than enough to live comfortably. I signed it without hesitation. That night, Felix and a few close friends from my university came over to my apartment. We ordered pizza, opened a few beers, and toasted to the future. I looked around my small living room, at the people who had actually stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. I realized then that family is not about blood. Blood just makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and showing up when the world is falling apart, that is what makes a family. I had lost my parents and my brother, but I had found my real family, and I had built a life that was finally, truly mine. A few months after the dust settled, I decided to share my story anonymously on a popular Reddit forum dedicated to toxic family dynamics. I needed to get the final pieces of the story out of my head. The response was overwhelming. The post blew up overnight, and reading the comments from complete strangers gave me a strange sense of validation that I never got from my own relatives. One user wrote, "Signing someone up for a 10-year military contract isn't just a sick prank, it is basically human trafficking. I am so glad he got a criminal record. 5 years of probation is entirely too light for trying to steal a decade of your life, but garnishing his wages for a decade is the exact level of petty revenge I live for." Another comment that got thousands of upvotes said, "Your parents failed you the moment they smiled at that forged document. They didn't love you. They loved the control your brother exerted over the family dynamic because it was easier than actually raising two equals. The fact that they drained their retirement savings for a convicted felon is their own karma. Let them rot with their golden child." A lot of people pointed out the irony of the situation. Someone commented, "The fact that you used your engineering skills to install the cameras that eventually took him down is poetic justice. He thought you were wasting your time playing with toys, and those toys handed you the win on a silver platter. Well played, man." Reading those words felt like closing a heavy book I had been carrying for 22 years. The internet had spoken, and the consensus was unanimous. I was not the crazy one. I was not the traitor. I was the survivor. One final comment stuck with me the most. It was simple, but it hit hard. Never, ever unlock that door. You built a fortress. Don't let the Trojan horse back in, no matter how much they beg. It has been nearly 2 years since the trial. I am thriving at my engineering job, and I recently bought a house of my own. As for my family, things have only gotten worse for them. Donovan cannot hold down a job because of his felony record, and his garnished wages leave him with barely anything. My parents, having blown their retirement to save him, are now struggling to pay their own bills. Just last week, I checked my mailbox and found 3 letters. They were from Vincent and Sylvia. I have not opened them, but the frantic voicemails they left on my work phone gave away the contents. They are begging for forgiveness. They say they miss me, that family should stick together during hard times, and they want to have dinner to talk about a fresh start. They also conveniently mentioned how tight money is right now. I am sitting at my kitchen table, looking at these unopened envelopes, and I am leaving the final verdict up to you. Now, after losing their savings and dealing with a son who cannot hold down a job because of his criminal record, my parents have been sending me letters asking for forgiveness and a fresh start. Should I even reply to their letters, or let them live with the son they chose? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button to support the channel and drop your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.